I am starting the live stream now, Mayor. I will let you know once we are live so that you can go ahead and call the meeting to order.
Desiree, it's showing live on YouTube on my screen.
Yeah. Same.
Let me confirm on my device and then, okay, I think we're live.
Okay, this is the Isle of Palm Special Emergency Council meeting, April the 13th, at approximately 1 p.m. Meeting was duly notified and then of acknowledgement with the press and the public in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. This meeting is a Zoom virtual meeting and that we'll be seeking expert medical advice again from MUSC Emergency Medicine Dr. Edward O'Brien. Order of business will be the consideration of amendments to Emergency Ordinance 2020-02 to implement further measures to protect the citizens of the Isle of Palms, including but not limited to extending the access restrictions and the prohibition of future check-ins for short-term rentals, hotels, and other accommodations, and other measures proposed by the safety and public health for the city of the Isle of Palms. Before we really get started, and we're going to have some guidelines, each council member will be able to ask Dr. O'Brien, and we're going to do this in alphabetical order. As each person speaks, please state your name so everybody knows who we've got going on. And we will go through each and every council member, and we'll go through it twice if we have to, or three. This is a pandemic time, and we want to make sure everybody's being heard. Okay, Dr. O'Brien, would you please kind of give us an update on how you see the Charleston greater area?
Mayor Carroll, we need to do a roll call first.
Okay. You want to do the roll call? You want me to do it?
Yes, sir. I'm happy to do it. Councilmember Streetman,
Present.
Councilmember Bell,
Present.
Councilmember Buchanan,
Present.
Councilmember Pounds,
Present.
Councilmember Ward,
Here.
Councilmember Popton. I see him. Councilmember Moy,
Here.
Councilmember Smith,
Here.
Mayor Carroll.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Okay, Dr. O'Brien.
All right. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Well, I think overall, we've made some pretty good progress on flattening the curve to a large degree with the coronavirus in our area. So things are looking promising in that regard. However, newer projections, with the curve flattening, as you probably realize, the curve moves further out to the right. So the peak gets delayed somewhat from what it would have been. So that's the positive news. The negative news is the peak being pushed out to the right is that you're likely to see a higher number of cases in the community for a little bit more extended period of time, but hopefully not so many that it overwhelms the hospital system. That's the whole idea. So I think some progress is being made. However, we are continuing to see more and more positive cases in the community.
Okay, let's go questions. We're going to do this in alphabetical order, Dr. O'Brien. So I'm just going to work my way down. Councilmember Bell, questions.
Thanks, Jimmy. When we talk about the peak, I think everything we're reading says peak is still not expected till the end of April. And the question I have, it's exponential growth on the upslope, but do we have any idea once we've hit this peak, and correct me if it's incorrect information, but once we've hit the peak towards the end of April, do we have an expectation on how long we'll be on the decline? And I know that's a very loaded question, but I think the public information that we have says that decline is going to be relatively slow.
I think that's true. That goes along to the with what the curve looks like. So the curve being steep, the decline would be faster, but the curve being flatter, you're correct. The decline is a little bit slower. Current projections we have, and we have our own internal projections as well as the ones that you probably use on the COVID-19 health data tracking sites and things like that. You know, we track our mortality and everything all the way through the summer, but we expect, as far as mortality and things like that, we expect a very, very steep decline in that by the end of May.
Thank you.
You have a question?
I'm good, Jimmy.
Thank you. Councilmember Buchanan.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I don't think I'll be able to vote in this. I'll excuse myself if there's any, but as for discussion, and I would like to know if there would be any benefit from extending this from either, because we have a couple more weeks to the end of this, to our current status right now, right? Yeah, until the end of April, as opposed to what would be the benefit between going to the end of May or the middle of May right now? Would you see any type of difference in that?
I think, you know, since it involves somewhat predicting, it'll be difficult to know. I think if we anticipate our peak being the very end of April, which is what we're thinking, the very end of April, early May, I would think 2 weeks on the other side of the peak wouldn't be very long to be able to tell how the curve is shifting. We'll know, but by the time that comes around, it's just hard. It's hard to tell because, you know, a lot of these symptoms take 2 weeks. A lot of people get sick and don't even go to the hospital until they've been sick for about a week, and then another week on top of that is when mortality hits.
Okay. Thanks, Mayor. Over.
Ron, did you have something else? Okay, Councilmember Moy.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you again, Dr. O'Brien, for joining us again. You know, I think, I hope my question isn't too close to what Councilmember Buchanan asked, but essentially, I think we're all trying to figure out, okay, we're anchoring on this notion of a peak and trying to determine how soon after we hit the peak can we start getting back to normal effectively. And you know, I think that what we're all wrestling with as a nation, and certainly us as a community, is what are the appropriate incremental steps for us to take, because it doesn't feel like we can just flip a switch and go back to normal. It feels like we have to incrementally get there. And so I guess my question is to you, you know, what are the impacts of flipping the switch, essentially? Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe once we get 2 weeks past the peak, things can get back to business as usual.
Sure. First of all, I want to commend the council for what you guys did before. I read some things in the paper, and I'm not a politician by any means, about how you guys really stood your ground, and then everybody else seemed to follow suit. So I do want to say you guys did a great job on that. To your question, I think you'll see it'll be less of a flip the switch and more of a gradual integration. So I think what's going to happen is hopefully we're on the pathway to get some more antibody testing out there to the community to see, hey, you know, have you been exposed? Are you immune to this disease potentially? You know, we don't know how long that might be for. But then can those people get back out into the community, right? Can those people go ahead and go back to work and not worry about being infected or infecting others? That amount of testing, I think, is rapidly going to increase within the next month. That's our hope. And then that will be, for lack of a better term, almost like a passport, a health passport, where you can go and do your things. I would think incrementally opening things, again, I'm not a municipal person, but I would say from a medical standpoint, opening things like our beaches and our parks to local people first for a certain amount of time and then opening up to outside people like renters and stuff like that. I don't know how you determine between those two, but I would think any kind of gradual opening while you continue to limit larger groups of people would be a reasonable alternatives.
Your question?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. O'Brien. Thank you, Mayor.
Is Councilmember Popson online yet? Hearing that, we'll go Councilmember Pounds.
Hey, thank you, Mayor. Dr. O'Brien, thank you again for coming to join. I'm glad you went down the path of a gradual reopening, because I think as we're struggling with timing, it seems like it would make some sense to open to locals before you truly turn the spigot back on. So I appreciate you saying that. So Mayor, I'm good right now. I'm assuming we'll have some conversation amongst ourselves after Dr. O'Brien finishes. So I don't have any additional questions right now.
Susan?
Hi, thank you, Mayor and Dr. O'Brien. My follow-up question would be about the danger of going back to normal too fast, and even the danger of resurfacing of the virus and residual outbreaks, and what we need to worry about there, and what the best plan of action is, a few months down the line to be monitoring for that, and how do we keep track of that best?
That's a great question. I think most experts would agree that there is a high likelihood of having future, we'll call them hotspots or outbreak spots, where multiple people are infected in a group or in one location, and that's what you definitely want to avoid. I think some common sense things to avoid to keep that from happening. Number one, you don't want to open back up everything to everybody too soon, because the one thing you don't want to do, we've taken 5 steps forward, you don't want to take 10 steps back, because you don't want to be that next hotspot, right? And so limiting groups of people is going to continue to be recommended by the CDC, I believe, for a minimum of eight weeks. And that doesn't mean you have to block everything. That just means that, any groups of 10 or more, or whatever number they decide, will continue to be discouraged and should probably be banned to prevent large spreads. So that's something to consider. And also, some people will continue to want to screen people who fly in at airports. If they're febrile or have illness, those people may need to be seen in advance and cleared medically. Some people think that we'll have enough testing out there to have people cleared from a testing mechanism, and then have ways to identify people and get them resources to be seen in person or tested should they have any kind of symptoms while they're here visiting and or locals. That, and then stay on top of things from a town standpoint if there's outbreaks going on in our community, which I imagine there will be sporadically from time to time. I would suggest still having an eye toward caution, however. As the number of cases continue to increase in South Carolina, I think, a little delay goes a long way.
Councilman Smith, is that good for you?
Just one other separate question. Last time you had some impactful things to say about cleaning, particularly in terms of short-term rentals and hotel rooms. And I'm wondering if you offered some feedback on that back then, but do you have any further recommendations? We have this opportunity where most of our rentals and homes and hotels are empty right now. What could we be doing to prepare for the return in terms of cleaning standards and that kind of thing? And should we be formulating some guidelines that would help us be in good position to welcome back visitors when it's appropriate.
Sure, that's a great point, and that's another thing where you guys could have a big impact. I mean, I don't know a lot about how long it takes to clean a house, a rental house, for example, or a hotel room, but I doubt that it could be cleaned to a thorough nature to do things like kill a coronavirus in just a few hours. So allowing a dormancy period between rentals where cleaning crews could really go in there and do a great job disinfecting would certainly be helpful. And making sure those cleaning crews are properly equipped, of course. And the longer we wait, the more availability we'll have of proper personal protective equipment that we'll be able to give those cleaning crews as well. So yeah, I would think increasing the I would call it dormancy or latency period between room cleanings or room changeovers, making sure that all the products that are used are, I would say hospital grade disinfectant, or at least that they kill the coronavirus itself would be really important. And then instituting more thorough cleaning mechanisms would also be important. And then on the other side of that, opening larger gathering places like hotels, possibly later than smaller gathering places like homes, I think would also make more sense in the long run.
Sorry. Thank you. I think that's all for me. I appreciate it so much.
Councilmember Streetman, do you have questions for Dr. Edward O'Brien?
Good afternoon, everybody. And Dr. O'Brien, thank you for being on with us again. Couple of things. In our prior meeting, Dr. O'Brien, you mentioned that a good number of our positives at that time that were testing positive were out-of-staters, particularly from the Northeast. Are we still seeing that same sort of trend in and around Charleston County? And I also have a follow-up question on that too, in regards to where South Carolina is on the curve right now and on antibody testing. Everything I read seems to indicate that South Carolina is still slightly lower than middle of the pack in terms of the testing that's been done. And I think 34 out of 50 as far as the rank in the state. So any comments you may have on that, I'd appreciate as well. Thank you.
Sure. I think for the first part of the question, New York continues to be a hotspot, one of the highest in the nation for total number of cases. Now they have obviously a very large population as well. Most of our cases that we're testing for now aren't necessarily associated with travel. Early on, the majority were associated with travel. But however, now we have community spread. So travel has been severely disrupted. So less are associated with travel and more associated with just spread within the community itself. And that's something that we expected to happen. The second part of the question is, where are we on the curve in terms of testing? I saw that data that you're referring to about the 34. When that first came out, it didn't involve private lab testing data. It just involved public lab testing. For us, it would be our DHEC system. And they're doing a great job testing as much as they can. But that did not necessarily include all the tests that we've done at MUSC, for example, and that Roper's doing, and Prisma, and other locations. And we're starting to get that data in now. So our testing is ramping up quite a bit. I know MUSC we've developed our own in-house lab testing. We can run hundreds of samples a day, and we are running hundreds of samples a day. So, so are the cases increasing just because we're testing more, or is there actually more spread? It's pretty hard to know, but we're definitely getting more positives. And antibody testing, we hope, is going to be the next wave of really precise and good testing that we'll be able to do. We're working on several different antibody testing platforms and systems currently. We have a couple that we're testing currently at MUSC, and I'm hoping you'll see that roll out more commonly in the rest of the state through some of the new Abbott machines. Some able to give you answers just within a couple of hours, actually. So we're ramping up.
I do have one other question, Mayor, if that's okay. Yeah, Dr. O'Brien, I was also reading that the peak for South Carolina is expected to be between April 25th through May the 2nd. Is the latest information I've read, and I think that's consistent with what you said earlier. And I guess my question is, if that's the peak, and then we still have, some people that are being tested for coronavirus, and my understanding is it can take up to 2 weeks for symptoms to emerge on people that are being tested. And that would put us well into May, I guess, before we would really know where we are on sort of flattening the curve or suppression. And I'm assuming that in suppression, once we reach that peak, and then a week or two afterwards, we'll start seeing cases go down exponentially just as much as they went up. Am I right or wrong in that?
That is the hope. The hope is that you're exactly right, and you're also right with the data. Current data models, most of the current data models now are predicting the peak. You're correct. At the end of this month to the very 1st of May, that changes day to day, but not too much. We're kind of narrowing it down there. So really, a few weeks away. And you're also right that from time of exposure to time of symptoms can take up to 14 days. You're correct. And then once you do have symptoms, it can take another week to several weeks before you get really, really sick, if you're going to get that way, or to where you recover. So a 2-week interval is a tough interval to make large judgments on. So we're using cumulative data to kind of draw the comparisons to what we think the curve will be like. What'll happen is once you get into this area of off of peak, where we're not worried about our hospitals anymore, COVID virus is not just going to go away, it's still going to be around. But the idea then is, let's really start tracing our contacts. If there's any outbreaks, we'll have to identify local people that, hey, there's an outbreak here, and make sure we're following anybody that person came in contact with closely to prevent surges. I hope that answered your question.
Mayor.
Member Ward. Ward,
Yes,
do you have a question for Dr. Edward Bryan?
yes, I do. Thanks for helping us, Dr. O'Brien. Couple of comments or questions. Do you recommend that we definitely decide on the extension today? Does it have to be today? Is the first question.
Oh, I don't know I'm not sure your regulations about timing and rentals and things like that. I'm also not sure about the time frame you're planning on extending. I haven't heard that either. So
Well,
I
I've
can't
just
really
been
comment
listening
on
to
that,
the
I'm sorry.
conversation. That's all. That it looks like. I don't know. I'm listening closely, but it sounds like around the middle of May. That's everybody's just throwing around right now. There's nothing firm, but the question is, do we need to decide on an extension today? As you can imagine, and we all know what we're balancing, economics versus health, and the well-being of our citizens and visitors and everyone. But as a small businessman, I know what it's like to be a payroll. I know what it's like to scramble to meet one. I have a lot of friends that are just that have employees that don't know how they're going to pay the rent and car payments and things like that. And we all understand how difficult that is a decision for us. But I just want to make sure that we inform the business community, but I don't want to get them unnecessarily upset by maybe calling this thing too soon. I'm just wondering if we decided on the middle of May, that's what I seem to be getting from you. Could we make that announcement public or vote on that like a week and 10 days, something like that? What are your thoughts on that, sir?
In terms of the science, I doubt that the peak curve will change a week or 10 days in when we think that peak is going to be. Now, how that affects businesses, or what businesses could start in the interim, I can't really say. I would think you would want to make the announcement as soon as possible, no matter what you decide, to prevent people from, making travel plans here and things like that. But again, I'm with you on the business. I mean, I got a pay cut, just like most other people at MUSC here recently. Fortunate to still have employment, but that's the big debate. Are things going to change radically in 7 to 10 days? I doubt it'll be a radical change. We hope it'll look better and better. But I would think the sooner the better for the decision.
Thank you very much.
Dr. O'Brien, it's my turn as mayor. Come on last. Going back to Jimmy's questions, Councilmember Ward's question, if we were to confer with you again in a week's time and not make a decision today, do you think that's too long of a period to wait? We want to make sure that we protect our residents and our guests coming here, and of course, our public safety personnel. But at the same time,
Absolutely.
So do you think waiting a week would be acceptable?
Oh, sure. I think, right. Yeah. As long as you weren't planning on opening up in that week, I think that's fine. And with time comes clarity. We get more data. The more time we have, the more data we get and the better the data. So I don't think that's unreasonable by any means.
Do the list one more time, Dr. O'Brien. I appreciate your patience. I really do. We do. We all do. Councilmember Bell, do you have any more questions for Dr. O'Brien?
Yeah, looking at the data set, I mean, one of the things I think that's troubling, and that frankly is just putting it out there for discussion. There's a big difference between a static data set and one that we allow to change. So when we're looking at the data right now, we're saying, well, we're going to be at the peak and it looks like it's in a decline. The minute we reopen to short-term rentals and beachgoers, we are going to reintroduce an entirely new data set. Would that not be a grievous cause for concern? The hotspots are shifting around the country. They're not static. So the areas that don't have a lot of infection today may have more infection tomorrow. And I'm very concerned that we have any consideration of reopening too soon. And I mean, frankly, I don't personally believe even having a conversation around the middle of May is appropriate. As we're talking about reopening a tourist location that is going to attract people from all over. So, comment on the data sets. I think all of the commentary assumes that we have relatively static data. Is that correct?
Yes. So the data sets are projections, right? And they're projections based on the previous data and the best projections, honestly, they're predictions of what we have moving forward. They change on a day-to-day basis, but in some regard, I see what you're saying. I have not seen,
based on what's here now, not what we would anticipate to be here with a reopening.
Correct. And I have not seen any beaches or tourist attractions make plans to reopen. I've seen the opposite. I've seen them most places extending, even in places like California, where the curve is significantly flattened. So I don't know. It's hard to say that will be opening sooner than you think. It's probably going to be later than you think, only because of, you're right, the very, very large crowds that it will attract.
Thank you.
Councilmember Buchanan. Any other questions?
I don't think so. I think the good thing we're going to do is we have to approach this, logically, both from a safety standpoint and a business standpoint. Whether, like you said, a decision doesn't need to be made today. We got a lot of great information, and he's available to meet later on after the numbers continue to come out, and we should continue to follow those numbers and those trends. Add to it, and if we need to extend this thing for You know, we have 2 more weeks on this. If we have to extend it 2 weeks beyond that, and we can make that decision, and we have to extend it 2 weeks beyond that, then we can make that. But I think if we take it in small increments and approach this as the numbers are coming out to us, instead of making a large change and then maybe have to step back, but make smaller changes, and as the numbers are coming through, and then continually and make decisions based on that as we're seeing the statistics come out. Over.
John?
No more questions for me.
Thank you, sir. Is Councilmember Popson come in? Hearing no. Councilmember Pounds, any more questions?
Not for Dr. O'Brien. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, we have Councilmember Popson now.
Okay, Kevin?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Do you have any questions for Dr. Edward O'Brien?
Not really, Mayor. I've been listening quite a bit, so it seems like everything that I was going to ask has already been brought up. Mainly the interest of, is it going to hurt us to wait a little while to make this decision? So I'm good.
Councilmember Smith?
I have one quick question for Dr. O'Brien, and that is, you obviously see value both in us restricting short-term rentals and in restricting access to the beach and for the sake of preventing large groups from forming. Do you see more value in one or the other in terms of limiting the corona spread?
I think, the most value is going to be avoiding any kind of group activity. I wish they were, they don't seem to be mutually exclusive. I've noticed even on all the beaches that have tried to keep them away, it's difficult to keep people even in short-term rentals from doing larger groups. So I don't know if they're mutually exclusive, but any kind of groups is definitely the worst.
Okay, thank you.
And once. Rusty? Council? Okay.
Yeah, one comment here in regards to what beach communities are doing. I know most of them are still keeping people away, but I read in the Island Packet the other day that Hilton Head reversed itself, and they actually are opening their short-term rentals immediately, basically, and excluding the COVID-19 hotspots from New York, New Jersey. And I don't know how they're going to manage that. And that was really against the residents' wishes down there also. They wanted to keep the short-term rentals suspended at this point, but I think there was a fear of lawsuits coming from some of the agencies, and they've decided to go against the grain in South Carolina and open them up unless they've reversed themselves again. Dr. O'Brien, just one final thing. I know that the estimate from the Institute for Health Metrics had estimated initially that there would be over 1,000 residents of South Carolina that would die from coronavirus. I think almost 1,100. And the current estimate is around 570, if I'm reading that correctly. Does that give you a lot of cause for optimism as we go forward, being a medical professional?
It does. I mean, it tells me that things like what you guys did by closing the beaches and short-term rentals are working. Some of it might be natural disease progression. Maybe we're developing some immunity, but I think a lot of it is social distancing and things really working. That's definitely very, very hopeful news.
Okay. Thank you. That's it, Mayor.
Councilmember Ward, any other questions?
I'd just like to say, I concur with Kevin and Ryan, what their comments were right in line with mine. And I really appreciate your taking time out of your busy schedule, Dr. O'Brien, and coming in and help us.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, and Dr. Brian, I have no other questions. Everybody's asked you those questions. So thank you very much for your expert advice. It's a wealth of information for us. So thank you very much for being here with us. And we will be in touch with you again.
Thank you all. Wish you the best.
Okay. Desiree.
Thank you, Dr. O'Brien.
Desiree.
Thank you. Bye.
Yes, Mayor?
Desiree, would it be okay if we went down the same format with our city attorney for questions?
Sure.
Sorry, Julia. Councilmember Bell, you're first at bat.
Yeah, I'm not sure what we're asking. We're obviously not asking legal questions because we can't. So the intent right now is non-legal questions of our attorney?
This is, we can ask questions when it comes, let me do it this way. We have a governor's mandate, 2020, 16 and 2020, 18. 16 was limiting the access to waterways and the beaches, and 18 was the essential and not essential businesses.
Mhm.
And the reason I was going to let everybody ask a question is we should, the state law supersedes whatever a city does. Is this correct? Or can we answer that, ask this question in public like this?
Well, I think the governor stated during his last press conference that his latest stay-at-home order was meant to supersede any current local restrictions that are in place. So as long as we're not going above and beyond to conflict with anything that he's stated, we're okay.
Thank you very much. So that's really what I was trying to get across is we can't go against what the governor has said, period. Okay. I don't think we go beyond that question-wise. So do I hear a motion to amend the emergency order 2020-02, which restricts and prohibits future short-term rentals for hotels, houses, and other accommodations and other measures proposed for the safety and public health of the city of Isle Palms? Do I hear a motion?
Jimmy, maybe have a little bit of discussion before the motion, because I do have a question related to questions for our attorney that I think plays into the conversation. And, you know, I think all of us, one of the biggest questions we're being asked right now is why are we restricting access except for property owners? And I think the answer to that per the governor's order is we are not. We're restricting access through the public access paths. So that is somewhat an enforcement question, a question of practice as to what we do on the island. But before we decide whether we're going to reintroduce an ordinance, I just want to make a comment, because my only and biggest concern is reliance on business licenses for people coming to the island, when in fact the only people with the business licenses generally are the holders, the contractors themselves. I've had a lot of commentary before we talk about the ordinance, even if we don't change the time frame, on the display of those licenses in the vehicles coming across. It's a protection issue for the public safety officers, and it's assurance that people have proper reason to be on the island. So if we're going to discuss an ordinance, timeframes aside, let's have, you know, I would like to hear from other council members about their feelings on the amount of people that are coming to the island that have no displayed business purpose and no limited access other than to their work sites.
Let's go down the line, keep it organized. Councilmember Buchanan.
Can we get any type of opinion from Chief Cornett on this, if you've had issues with it? at the checkpoint, or what measures he thinks would be better to expedite or help people get through and control access?
Sure, I can answer that. As far as the business license in the window, that's been successful. It's been working for us. It minimizes impact, and most of them are taking the copy that they have. Typically, the business owner will get the business license, and they've made copies to give to all their employees that are conducting work on the island. They'll place that placard or a copy of that business license in their window on the visor. Typically works unless it's a big truck and you got somebody like me who has to stand on their tippy toes and jump up and down until they hold it up so they know I'm short. Other than that, it's working really well. It keeps it expedites the process, and we're really not having any issues with the construction workers coming through at all.
Thank you.
I have a question for Chief. This is Susan Smith, and
Let's go down the line so we keep
oh,
it
I'm sorry.
ordered. So the next one up is Councilmember Moy.
Thank you,
Councilmember
Mr. Mayor. Yep. No, I appreciate Councilmember Buchanan's question. I had the same thing. So in this regard, I think we have to look to the front lines and the folks who are actually working the checkpoint. And if it's not broken, then what are we trying to fix? And it sounds, from what I'm hearing from the chief, the current system that we have in place is working, and it's keeping his team safe. And that's, we want to enforce the ordinance and we want to keep his team safe. And it sounds like both things are happening. I don't have any questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Moy. Councilmember Popson.
And that it seems like the checkpoints are working and nothing's broken. That's it.
Councilmember Pounds.
Hey, Chief, you just referenced construction workers. I mean, the checkpoint's certainly not a perfect stopping point, but Randy, I haven't heard or seen much where people are getting through that aren't supposed to be here. I mean, can you comment more than just construction workers, Chief?
Sure, we're checking. Everybody who comes through has to have a reason to be here. They have to meet the ordinance as it was written by and approved by council. So even the businesses that aren't construction, they still have a copy of the business license or something from the business that says that they work there. Other than that, we're seeing residents, we're seeing some of the people that work with Harris Teeter and some of those businesses like that coming to restock. We've got some of the landscapers coming through, but they all have valid business licenses. We're really not having many issues with people coming through that they're not. The one area that was brought to our attention that we could tighten up on this morning was dealing with the people riding the bikes, the cyclists and the walkers that are walking or jogging from the other end. We're going to do a better job at scrutinizing that starting this morning as well.
Yeah, thank you. That was my experience too. I was just curious. Thank you for that. All right, Mayor.
Member Smith.
Am I okay?
He's muted again.
Okay. Okay, I hope you guys can hear me. I had a couple of questions for the chief that have been relayed to me by residents with concerns. And one is there any monitoring, say, for example, of construction workers at a site? I think there's concerns that once they get there or when they're on break, they're not practicing social distancing. Is that something that you all can really police if they're on a private property, or is there any monitoring going on with that? Is my first question.
Yes, ma'am. So we can enforce it because they are working at a construction site. It's a business at that point, and we can check the social distancing to make sure they are complying with the governor's orders. We have been doing that and now continue to put that out to our folks to make sure that they are checking on it. We're encouraging, if anybody has a concern or they see a place that's in violation, to please contact us through our non-emergency number, and then we would go and address that situation.
Okay, great. A next question related is I have heard from some residents who live next door to construction, and because they are home 24/7 now and practicing social distancing with their complete family, the noise is more bothersome to them than it would be otherwise. Have you been hearing concerns about construction noise because of the current situation, more so than you would have before?
No, ma'am. I would say we have not received an increase in calls for noise ordinance violations. Actually, I'm not even aware of any of them coming to the police department in reference to that type of issue.
Okay. I think that those were my main concerns that I'd heard as far as being passed along. Although I was curious about the cyclist situation, walking and cycling. I've been out biking and walking. What are the concerns around that?
So they have not been checked to make sure that they meet the ordinance that was put in place by council. They've been allowed to come through, and we have to adhere to the ordinance with everybody. The ordinance didn't specify just vehicular traffic. So we've got to check everybody and make sure they're coming onto the island for the purposes outlined in the ordinance that was passed.
Okay. So it was purely we're talking about the people who are coming onto the island. I thought maybe there was a broader concern about people being out bicycling and walking, which I hoped was not the case.
No, ma'am, that's not the case.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Streetman.
Appreciate it. Chief Cornett, just a quick question in regards to compliance on the beach. I know the governor has executive order out there that the access to the beach access paths have been closed, that sort of thing. And quite frankly, there's a lot of controversy about that none of us can change. And that's regrettable that our own residents can't really get out on the beach. But have we had any kind of issues that you've been aware of with your beach services officers or anyone with, adhering to the compliance on the beach itself?
So in general, I started keeping track when we were giving a lot of verbal warnings to individuals on the beach access, and that started last week. I can tell you in that time period, we've given 31 verbal warnings, 1 written warning for the beach access, and then we've issued 3 citations in relation to the checkpoint.
Okay, just wondering about that. And I also wanted to add, as did Councilman Buchanan and Ward and Moy as well. I honestly, I haven't sat there and camped out and watched the checkpoint, but the times that I've been back and forth to the post office or to the Harris Teeter or whatever, I honestly haven't seen any real issues with that would make me think that we're allowing people on the island that shouldn't be here. But just my personal observation. Thank you. That's it.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Ward.
Only comment is that I think the checkpoints are working well, and I want to congratulate Chief Cornett and the whole police department for doing a really fine job of protecting us. And it's not an easy job what they got out there. They're standing on their feet for hours on end, helping keep us safe. But I really appreciate it. So thank you, Chief.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I'll pass that on to the guys.
My turn on here, and this goes to Chief Cornett. What's the difference from a verbal warning versus a written warning versus a written citation? Is there a difference there?
So the verbal warning means that we caught you and we just said, hey, you're not in compliance, could you leave? And they leave at that point. A written warning it's a documented thing that gets sent to the state that says we gave them a warning. We made contact with them to give them a written warning. It doesn't carry any more than that. They can really make paper origami out of it if they want to, but it's a written warning. A citation means they've been charged with violating a statute, whether it's a state ordinance or a state statute or a city ordinance. And the 3 that we have written have been for the city emergency ordinance pertaining to the checkpoint.
Let me clarify just to hear more. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. The way I understand it is if Councilmember Streetman, who lives on the beach, gives Councilmember Carroll permission to go through his yard to get on the beach, am I allowed on the beach as a resident who does not live on the beach? Or would I get a written warning, or would I? Do you see what I'm saying? Or
Yes, sir. So for our understanding, the way we take the governor's order is that he closed the beach access paths, the public beach access paths. So if they can get on the beach through private property, he didn't close the beach in general. He just closed the beach access path. So our warnings are for people that we're catching on the beach access path, not using private property that they are allowed to be on. We don't want to encourage people to use private property that they're not allowed to be on. That's called trespassing. But we really want to, adhere to the governor's orders, which specifically pertain to the public access path.
number one, you'll never catch me on the beach. Thank you. Any, just go back down to questions before we go further. Councilmember Bell, anything else?
No, that was, I'll thank Rusty and his new group of best friends for clarifying that.
Ryan? Okay, Councilmember Moy. I might be on mute. I don't know.
No, I'm sorry. I gave
Councilmember-
a thumbs up. I'm good.
Okay. You're good. Okay, Councilmember Popson.
He's good. He doesn't have any questions.
Councilmember Pound.
Nope, I'm good for the chief. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
I'm good, thank you.
Councilmember Streetman with the beach access.
For the record, just to be clear, early on, when the governor issued their order and it excluded private property owners from having to obey the no beach access as any other citizen of this island, I made it very clear on social media and a number of sites that I would be complying with the governor's order. And I am proud to say that I will continue to do that. And even though I can see the beach, I'm not on the beach. And so that's where I stand. And so what's good for the rest of us is good for me. We're not going to change anything on that.
Thank you, Councilmember Streetman. Councilmember Ward.
Thank you.
Jimmy?
I'm good.
Okay, and my closing thing is just like Councilmember Streetman. Again, I won't be found on the beach, and nor will you find me launching my boat off my dock. The intent is to keep people off the beach and keep them off the water. Let's go back to the reason why we're here. Is there a motion to amend the emergency order 2020-02?
I will make the motion to amend it for discussion, because I think we need to let people know whether we're reconvening at a date set or intent on moving forward with a motion. So I'll make a motion to change the current ordinance to May 31st.
A second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion, going down the list. Councilman Bell made the motion. Do you have any discussion on it?
Yeah, I don't think I've heard anything today from Dr. O'Brien that would change my opinion that the introduction of off-island people into the community through short-term rentals or tourism is a benefit to the residents of the community. I think we've done a great job up to now. And I'll commend our chief at this point as well. I did want to make one comment. We had a lot of comments about Low Corporation. I'd like to commend Dan Batista because reading what they've done is very responsible as well. And I think we need to stay the current course at least through May and let this thing settle out and not get complacent, because the big danger to the community is complacency. That's all I've got to say.
Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
This is Desiree. I just want to clarify for the record that the motion that was made by Councilmember Bell and seconded by Councilmember Streetman was to extend both the access restrictions and the prohibition on new check-ins for short-term rentals through May 31st.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Member Buchanan.
Again, I'm just going to state the fact that we have just over 3 weeks left on our prohibition right now. Like the good doctor had mentioned, the fact that we can monitor this thing by the week. To add another 4 weeks to this without just watching it. I think we need to get through what we have, monitor it, as he mentioned, and he had no objection to come back and meet with us in the future, whether it be next week or the following. And I think the council needs to continue to meet like this, at least once a week, at the minimum, to discuss, the statistics and the rate of spread. And at that point, we can make those decisions as we need to move forward from there. But like I said, you go to the end of May. I don't think it's a wise choice, but I think if we have to go to the end of the May, we should do it week by week and monitor those situations.
Mr. Mayor, this is John.
Yeah.
I think I'm up next, right?
Yes, sir. You are.
All right. Last name M, I'm not used to being so close to the front. I was in the middle. For the most part, I'm going to agree with, frankly, everybody that's spoken. I think it might seem that there's at odds here. At the end of the day, no one's suggesting we do anything different between now and April 30th. And since we're not making that change, and since we do have just over 2 weeks until that date, it would be valuable to have more data to make a decision. And I'll simultaneously say I fully expect us to be in a restricted state through the end of May. Now, I think the data will tell us what does that restricted state look like. And frankly, it could be more restricted than we have now. I don't think that's likely. And I think that the data is it's coming in, and we're looking at the measures we're taking are good and they're working. And I think what we're hearing from the doctor is we're probably going to need to maintain the vast majority of those practices in order to keep it low and to keep ourselves from becoming a hotspot. And so that, it's a good message for, I think, the community, the business community, the residential community to know things are not going to get back to normal in May. We might find ways to start opening some certain things back up, but we don't know what that's going to look like right now. And so I agree in large part that it makes sense for us to come back and reconvene in a week and see if there's a new story coming from the data, if there's new information, new facts, maybe a new antibody test, maybe, if we have new information that some folks have antibodies, that they're not carrying the disease, that they're not spreading it, then, that changes the discussion around, okay, how do we figure out who those people are and let them, open up businesses to people who aren't spreading the disease. And so I do agree that it makes sense for us to hold off on making a decision today. But I think we do need to send that strong message to the rest of the community that, hey, this level of restriction is likely to continue through the end of May. And, this is a painful time for everybody. There's personal discomfort that we're hearing loads and loads from for a whole host of reasons, from the simple thing of going to the beach to people can't pay their bills and people have employees that are hurting. And so obviously we want to make the most informed decision that we can with the best information that we can get a hold of. Yeah, I think it does make sense for us to take a week, see what comes in, see what new information, see what new studies come in.
Thank you, Councilmember Moy. Councilmember Popson.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I agree with Councilman Moy and Buchanan. As we know, the governor has closed the beach and the access to the waterways to the 27th, stay at home to the 27th. And we've got our ordinances in effect at the end of the month. I just don't see that it hurts to wait at least another week to see if there's any new data. Just a small sample, you know, Charleston County on the 6th of April was 269. As of the last report, we're down to 227. Mount Pleasant was 71. We're down to 57. Now that's a small sample, but it just seems like stuff is kind of working in the right direction. So I don't see where it would hurt for us to wait another week to make the decision.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Pounds.
Yeah, I would be where most everybody is at this point. If the governor's through the 27th and we're through the 30th, you know, we could meet 2 weeks from today. I don't think we're going to have any new information. We just may have better information at that point to make a decision. So I would definitely be in favor of pushing a decision out, Mayor.
Member Smith.
I would concur. I see the potential that we will need to continue restrictions into at least mid-May, but I think it would be best if we waited another week before we make that official.
Councilmember Streetman.
The motion that Councilmember Bell made for the purpose of discussion, because I pretty much agree with what most everybody else has said here. And I think Councilmember Moy said it very well. I think we remain fluid and flexible during all of this, gather more information instead of putting a hard date on an amended ordinance, keep ourselves flexible, open, see what the data shows. We're already, you know, we already know where we're going to be to April the 30th anyway. So I see no harm in us gathering more data and see what comes down the road over the next week or two, and then meet whenever it's deemed necessary as called by the mayor or a majority of council members.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Ward. Councilmember Ward.
No comment.
No comment. Okay. No comment from Mayor Carroll. Make time for a vote. All those in favor of the motion to amend to extend it to May 31st, both the rentals and beach and water access to extend, signify by saying yay. We'll go down the list as before.
I was going to withdraw the motion. Procedurally, can we do that?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to withdraw the motion and
Second has to
reconsider the second date.
Who made the second?
Councilmember Streetman.
Streetman.
Yeah, second.
Do you want to?
Second.
Councilmember
Yeah.
Streetman, are you withdrawing your second as well?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay.
Save the-
So as I read it now, we have no changes to our current ordinance 2020-02. No
Mr.
vote-
Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
may I make a comment?
of course you may.
Stay the course.
I think that has been clear. Okay.
Mr. Mayor and Desiree, if we could, at this time, if we could go ahead and schedule another meeting for next week at the same time?
Yes, we can make that happen today. We'll put it on the calendar for next Monday at 1 o'clock.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. No need for executive session, Julia. Sorry, but we did have to ask you a couple questions before.
Quite all right.
Do I hear a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
That's my man. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
9.
Bye.
Zoom worked great.